Last night, I watched Rachel Maddow's program. And she had, at one point, she had David Enrich on as a guest. He's the financial editor at the New York Times. And the reason she had him on, he's written a new book, or he's written a book. It's new to the public. It's went available today. I bought one today, online, not from Amazon. It's entitled Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. And another author who reviewed the book said this: Enrich tells the story of how one of the world's mightiest banks careened off the rails, threatening everything from our financial system to our democracy. A tale that will keep you up at night. End quote. Now, Deutsche Bank, of course, was one of the German banking systems that helped build the death chambers at Auschwitz and other places where 6, 7, depending on who's doing the counting, million people, men, women, babies, children, fetuses, were all murdered by the Nazis. Deutsche Bank helped finance the construction of those ovens and gas chambers and pits where children were thrown alive and screaming to be burned alive, and the barracks, and the Arbach macht frei, work makes you free, the sign over the gate at Auschwitz, right? Here's a publisher note. On a rainy Sunday in 2014, a senior executive at Deutsche Bank was found hanging in his London apartment. Bill Brockschmidt had helped build the 150-year-old financial institution into a global colossus, and his sudden death was a mystery, made more so by the bank's efforts to deter investigation. Brockschmidt, it turned out, was a man who knew too much. In Dark Towers, award-winning journalist David Enrich reveals the truth about Deutsche Bank and its epic path to devastation, tracing the bank's history back to its propping up of a default-prone American developer in the 1880s, its history of helping the Nazis build Auschwitz, and wooing Eastern Bloc authoritarian governments. Emmerich shows how in the 1990s, via a succession of hard-charging executives, Deutsche made a fateful decision to pursue Wall Street riches, often at the expense of ethics and the law. Soon, the bank was manipulating markets, violating international sanctions to aid terrorist regimes, scamming investors, defrauding regulators, and laundering money for Russian oligarchs. Ever desperate for an American foothold, Deutsche Bank also started doing business with a self-promoting real estate magnate nearly every other bank in the world had decided was too dangerous to touch: Donald Trump. Over the next 20 years, Deutsche Bank executives loaned billions to Trump, the Kushner family, and an array of scandal-tarred clients, including convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Dark Towers is the never-before-told saga of how Deutsche Bank became the global face of financial recklessness and criminality, the corporate equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction. It is also the story of a man who was consumed by fear, the man who committed suicide, of what he'd seen at the bank, and that man's son's obsessive search for the secrets his father kept. I can't wait to read this book. And, when I listened to this last night, when I listened to Rachel last night, and then when I read the publisher's blurb about what the book is about, I got curious all over again about the companies that had assisted the Nazis, the German corporations and American corporations, they weren't all German, who had assisted the Nazis not only in their rise to power in Germany in the 20s and 30s, but also in the destruction of millions upon millions of people, those companies. Some of them were active participants in the Holocaust. Some of them would simply use Jews for slave labor until those Jews were no longer capable of continuing as slaves, and then they would be switched to Bergen-Belsen or Sobibor or Treblinka or Auschwitz to be burned alive or gassed and burned. The corporations participated directly and indirectly in genocide. And, I as I have before, I started wondering why those companies, when the horror of the Second World War ended and the trials at Nuremberg were finally complete, it took years to bring as many people to trial as the Allies were able to bring to trial. It took years for the Nuremberg trials to complete. And they weren't just set in Nuremberg. But why were the corporations that had participated, why were those corporations? I know some of the corporate officers were given prison sentences. I think maybe one or two of them were actually executed for their participation in the slaughter of 6 million Jews and God knows how many other unfortunates who happened to live in Germany at the time. But why weren't the company names struck, removed forever? Only in a historical sense. Why were those corporations allowed to proceed under their old name? Every time I get on an elevator, I don't care where it is, and I see on that little brass plate that has the inspection certificate, and underneath it'll say the manufacturer of that elevator. It'll say Siemens. Siemens. If I get on an elevator like that in a department store, an office building, and a couple of years ago, we attended a bat mitzvah here in Atlanta, and it was a synagogue with a couple of floors, and when I got on, in the synagogue, Siemens in the elevator. So after I read that about Deutsche Bank, and keep in mind, Deutsche Bank has been the chief funding shithole of Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. And Kushner's a Jew. Kushner is a Jew. And he does business with a bank that built the ovens to burn the corpses of his tribe, of his people. What the fuck am I missing here? What am I missing? Why weren't the companies that assisted in the Holocaust dissolved, their corporate headquarters burned to the ground and salted? Why wasn't a law passed by the victorious Allies after the defeat of Nazism, a law that said, never fucking again can you use the name Bayer, as in aspirin. How many times a day, a week, a year, whatever, maybe you don't take aspirin, but how many, are you on what is it, the 91 milligram aspirin regimen to stop a second heart attack or prevent a first one? Every fucking time, if you're using Bayer aspirin, those little 91 milligram little yellow pills, every time you take one, you are providing profit to a company that assisted in the execution of 6 million people. How the fuck can you do it? How do you do it? I don't care if you're Jew or Gentile. How the fuck do you take a Bayer aspirin? Or a Bayer anything? How do you do it? I'm missing something. I know I'm missing something in all this. Barclays Bank. This is a list of companies involved in the Holocaust from Wikipedia. Barclays Bank, based in London. Krupp, based in Essen, Germany. Krupp. Didn't they make, what did they make? I know they made explosives, but they were involved in the Holocaust too. Siemens, we've talked about Siemens. Next time you get on an elevator, just look up there and see if it says Siemens. Elevators are made, or used to be made, here in the United States. Bayer, of course. BASF. Have you seen those commercials? We don't make the products. We make the products better. Right? BASF. We don't execute the Jews. We make the execution of the Jews better. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. You have your choice. You can listen to The Ranting with the audio podcast, or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com. And never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.